Perfect. Mandy, would you like to introduce yourself very quickly?
Yes, well, my name is Mandy Nayton and I'm the CEO of the Dyslexia Foundation in Perth, Western Australia. I'm also the CEO of SPELD in Melbourne, which is SPELD Victoria, and President of Auspeld. My background is one of both a educational and developmental psychologist working in the field of learning difficulties, and I'm also a teacher.
Beautiful. And can you just give a very quick explanation of what is Auspeld?
Okay, Auspeld is the Australian Association of Specific Educational Learning Difficulties Associations in Australia.
Beautiful. Now, Australia is a state country, so there's Queensland, there's New South Wales, there's Northern Territories, etc., etc. Is dyslexia looked upon in the same way, and is it provided for in the same way around the different states?
Look, it's relatively close, I would say, although there are some differences. Each state has their own education department, and therein lies sometimes a little bit of a problem in that they do like to set their own agendas, they like to come up with their own policies and practices. Having said that, they do also talk to each other quite a lot. I think in the main, the differences that we see are at the time of the very end of school when students are applying for special examination arrangements. And in some cases, states are quite lenient in that if a student has been getting a special educational arrangement for many years, then they might kind of allow it to go through, and in other cases they have very strict requirements for students to demonstrate that they have a significant functional impact as a result of their dyslexia, which then means that they don't necessarily get the adjustment or the accommodation that they have been used to, which can of course be quite a shock for the student.
And would they get the same adjustments in, let's say, Queensland as they would in New South Wales?
Not necessarily, no. Again, even though the states might be right next to each other, that doesn't necessarily mean they're any closer in approach. It sometimes varies depending on which political group is in power.
Yeah.
So whoever the Minister for Education is in that state. Again, there is a separate Minister for Education in each state. There is a separate department. There is a different Director General of the departments and so on. And you know, the need to respond to students with learning difficulties, and in fact a whole range of special educational needs, varies according to different departments.
And it would be difficult to talk about Australia, or maybe neglectful to talk about Australia, without acknowledging that you've got what you might call the European Australians, the settler Australians, and the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders Australians. And the second category, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders, have a number of different languages, and they have their own educational needs already. Is there a movement to understand dyslexia among these people? Is there an organisation that represents them? How does that work?
Well, there's not an organisation that would be focused very specifically on dyslexia in the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. So I would say two things. One, that there are some Aboriginal communities that are very remote, and in fact extremely isolated, in which children grow up speaking an entirely different language, not just to English but to other Aboriginal languages that may be somewhere in the vicinity of their community. Now, obviously that poses some specific educational challenges, because teachers going into those communities will invariably not speak that language. So there are challenges there. I would say that becomes the highest priority then for those communities. Speaking to some of the community members, and I've spoken to some of the elders in the communities who speak about their desire for children to learn to read and write. They are very keen for their children, whether it's their children or the grandchildren, to learn to read and write in English, because they see it as an opportunity for those students to at least have choice in what they do next with their lives. So this is the notion of dyslexia is not a high priority. We do see a lot of students struggling in those communities for a whole variety of reasons, and we work very closely with quite a lot of the communities to ensure that they are getting the most appropriate resources and support and training that we can provide for them. At all times, however, remaining very culturally sensitive to their needs. So this is a really important part of the way in which we interact, not just with remote Aboriginal communities, but in fact all communities, as we work with a lot of schools that have many children from other countries in them, in which the language spoken at home is not English, and also they come to school with very different views, very different spiritual beliefs, many things that we need to take, will need to be aware of and be respectful of. So I think that's a really key part. The other thing that I would say is for a lot of Aboriginal people living in communities like the main centres, the capital cities around Australia, their first language is English. So it is not that we are therefore dealing with a situation in those cases where we are having to address English being a second or third or fourth language. We also have some students or children in Australia growing up in households in which they speak an Aboriginal English. So this is a kind of a bit of a mix of standard Australian English, or what we might call classroom English, and their home language, which is a slight variation of English. And again, we need to be respectful of that and take that into account. I think that then becomes a different priority, but what we are still wanting very much to ensure is starting to be better understood, and this hasn't been well understood, is that sometimes there are children in remote Aboriginal communities or in schools in Perth where there's a high Aboriginal population, or another population that may be in that school from another country where English is not their first language, where we have to be careful not to always say, oh, it's because of the background that is a language other than a language or dialect other than English. Sometimes I think we wait too long to acknowledge that this is not the reason necessarily that these students are taking so long to learn to read, to spell, to write in English. So I think it's finding that right space of respect, support, encouragement, but also acknowledging that there will be some children in all of those communities and schools who do struggle more than they should.
Thank you very much. Thank you.